The real monsters are in the mind of man, not in nature. William Golden, the Lord of the Rocks. From the darkest episodes in history, humanity demonstrates a disturbing inclination towards cruelty. We are often cold, selfish, and cruel, even without obtaining any benefit from it. John Lee Mill once said that bad people need to achieve their goals is that good people keep looking around doing nothing. When a great moral disaster occurs, only a small minority commits the atrocity, but this minority is almost always qualified by the majority, who passively refuses to act. How many times great injustices happen simply because we opted by turning your face or staying silent? Tolstoy suggests that most of us have a clear idea of what it is, right and wrong, most of the time. It happens. Why don't we spend our time dealing with complex philosophical or ethicals, but we just live our lives, guided by sense, common morality? Although I'm not sure if this is true, safe or wouldn't be a big disadvantage for demons. Segundo Screwtape, the experienced demon, in the book Letters from the Devil to His Apprentice S. One of the most revealing explorations of this everyday evil is precisely in this work. In it, the author describes the advice of a demon to divert a man of God and goodness, leading you to addiction and cruelty. Screwtape is in charge of removing the patient of virtue and of God. He argues that, although demons maybe fail to convince a being human that a certain moral argument is wrong, can almost always make you feel that this argument is irrelevant. One way or another, frequently, we are attracted to ideas because of your usefulness or dignity, more than for one rational reason, to believe in them. So, Screwtape advises your warm red to plant in your victim's mind the idea that concerns about morality, God, or ethics are not real, who are too abstract to have practical meaning. Screwtape says under no circumstances the patient must think about what is right or wrong. Instead, should focus on the practical, in what is immediately in front of you. I know by chance the patient starts to think about ethical issues or theological. Wormwood must distract you, bringing your attention back to something trite, like what you'll eat for lunch, or the immediate worries of the morning. The idea is to promote a general apathy in relation to anything related to values. Human beings can even say that they have principles, but in practice, these principles are so from your actions, which is as if they don't exist. The thought behind it, and many other Screwtape machines, is to ensure that humans never get too attached to an ethical position. In the end, he becomes a kind of moral nihilistic without, however, consciously assume this stance. It is not necessary for him to abandon his moral values completely, just distract you from these values repeatedly, especially when practical difficulties arise. To maintain the reasoning here is simple. The more concerns about right or wrong recede, easier is for other things to take their place. According to Screwtape, this is quite simple because, at the bottom, we don't get so excited about systems, value indices, from the beginning. I find this point interesting because sometimes it applies to me too. Like most people, I like to think of myself as someone with principles and who, in general, try to be as kind as possible. But I can remember countless times when I was a lot less kind than I could have been, just because of my emotional state at that moment. Although Light is mostly talking about how we can forget our relationship with God due to the concerns of the material world, I believe this has one wider application. Often, even without realizing it, we allow our values to seem less real or merely theoretical, as a luxury we can leave aside when reality pressures us. Those who do not believe in God may not fear the flames of hell, But if they violate their own values, often, your consciousness can torment, lost but then ever imagined, as they turn into something who no longer recognize. Although Christianity generally emphasizes free will and the sovereignty of the human soul, light dedicates a lot of time to the work to talk about the importance of the social circle and a person's environment to capture their mind and condemn hell. One of the first observations of Screwtape is your approval of the fact that the patient spend time with your materialist friend. Then the demons guarantee that the patient is involved with a group of high society thinkers, people who consider themselves sophisticated. The man naturally wants to impress these new friends, then start repeating what they say. When they encourage one morally disgusting stance, he simply accepts or softens his position without positioning itself openly. Screwtape, you want, in the end, that the patient develops a species with a divided personality. Pray in church and see yourself as a good Christian, but at dinner with your new social circle disregards these same principles. This state of mind, one mix of self-complacency and deep hypocrisy, is very useful for demons. Little by little, the patient's habits are moving away from their principles, and he starts to act as is most convenient at present, without realizing, until one day he discovers that he no longer knows what it is, right or wrong, only what is useful at the moment. It turns him into a moral Machiavellian. And how many times it is more convenient to be cruel than kind. It will be easy to lead you to brutality. Screwtape claims that of the most useful states of mind that a demon can inculcate in its victim, its frivolity, i.e., refusal to deal with any matter, whether moral or not, seriously. The patient must be led to soak in irony, who forget what you believe and stop caring about the truth. Perhaps the most disturbing thing is realizing that just because we're in good company doesn't mean we're safe. This is a classic thought of itself. Louise, where pride is not seen just as an isolated fault, but rather how to think too much of yourself. It makes sense, for the threat of how the demons use social connections to corrode gradually the values of its victims is always encourages them to feed some form of division or selfishness. Instead of making the company of people he admires make it more attractive, she leads him to look with disdain for those outside your inner circle. Your high society friends end up dividing your mind in two, turning against itself, and sowing an internal division that reflects the external. Frequently, we look for other signs of how we should behave, so there's a strong argument for being cautious with whom we spend our time, especially if we realize that these people are, little by little, making us more cruel and less kind. On the other hand, Lewis shows that even beliefs based on virtues are misguided, may end up stimulating our worst instincts. He also highlights that the feeling of superiority over others was, and it is still, a crucial component in many historical atrocities, as well as in various everyday evils. Moral self-sufficiency allows people to commit terrible actions and, yet, leave with the feeling that they are somehow good or on the right side. It is possible that we do not even realize how much we betray ourselves and others, all in the name of our false ideas of superiority. I want to go deeper into this because Devil's Letters to His brings observations, brilliance, about how we can deceive ourselves, believing that we remain faithful to our values, even when we haven't practiced them in years. In Confessions, St. Augustine often talks about evil as a form of ignorance. He describes how his life before conversion was full of illusory pleasures, who denied it any true sense of achievement, compared to theological glory that he later found. This theme is especially important for light. That in your letters explores the role of fantasy and illusion in maintaining cruelty and distancing oneself from goodness. On one of the letters, Standard Screwtape explains that there are three parts to a human being: fantasy, the intellect, and the will. Most of the Screwtape advice revolves around ensuring that human beings never allow anything to good get out of the fantasy realm, while the cruel, the stingy, and the unkind dominate your will. For example, he must fantasize extensively about doing good, perhaps wondering if a great spiritual leader, or promising to donate everything to charity after his death. However, theses must always be distant, in the future, and preferably unattainable, but enough to capture your imagination to the point where they almost look real. The danger of imagination is that a detailed fantasy can be so convincing that we seem to have already reached our goal. On the other hand, in the world outside of fantasy, Screwtape guides the victim to be guided to bad mood and resentment. Your pride must be inflamed, so that your kindness ceases to be genuine and becomes transactional. He must convince himself of his intellectual superiority, disregarding the opinions of others. As Screwtape says, let him comfort you, imagining that you have already done the world a gigantic good, or that it will certainly do so in the future. What are 1,000 little brutalities in the face of the greatness of her benevolence? This is a real evil genius stroke from Screwtape. He recognizes that we can curl up in ourselves to continue, convinced of our fundamental goodness, even when there is little evidence of this in the real world. Screwtape wants us to imagine being good at essence, even when we are cruel to those around us. The grandeur of our morals means that we lose sight of everyday cruelty. We practice the fact that we yelled at someone in a store, or been rude with a friend, no longer seems particularly important. This vision lays out the ideas of good and evil so far from the scope of our everyday life that almost makes them theoretical. We lost sight of the old idea that our virtues manifest themselves essentially, and so we don't notice our lingering worldly horror. This is perfect for demons, because thus discourage the victim of comments on your life and realize what you're doing. Instead, she usates her intellect to rationalize when she is cruel, and yours to imagine when you're kind. According to letters from the devil to his, if people have a moment of epiphany, often pass directly from moral self-sufficiency for despair. They believed for so long that they were good people, that when they find out that this is not true, can resist the opposite extreme. As Satan will not be lost in heart, decide it's better to reign in hell than to serve in heaven, and begin to think they are too lost to change your ways. Then they have nothing left. If you don't embrace your own cruelty, this idea of light is revolutionary, because many philosophical studies on evil focus on the great atrocities. Sigmund Freud, for example, investigated how internal conflicts and the repressed desires can lead to destructive behavior. And Albert Camus questioned how the absurdity and lack of meaning in life can lead people to adopt nihilistic philosophies or desperate conduct. However, it ended not so worried about it, but yes, with a more recognizable and everyday type of evil, the kind of cruelty that any one of we can practice. In one optional section, Screwtape emphasizes that it doesn't matter if someone is condemned to hell for impressive sins, or for one infinity of small evils, because in the end, all end up in the same place. With this, light reminds us of something that we often try to forget. Our little cruelties are so real as the monsters that pave the way for history, so it's worth asking ourselves, we are really as good as we think we are? Or may our goodness become something much more theoretical than practical, while our wills indulge in little evils every day. Even so, the last letter that Screwtape writes, a wormwood, is full of anger and resentment, for for he scolds wormwood for having left his victim's mind escape its claws. Now the victim is under God's protection, and nothing they can do will reach her. This is the point that light wants to emphasize. The idea that it is through the grace of God that people are saved and can resist temptation. However, this offers a rich field of reflection, even for those who are not believers. The first light argument: is it never too late to be saved, or, in secular terms, to change course? It may be painful to understand our everyday ills, but that's the first step to changing them. Yes, Lewis emphasizes the harm of ordinary malevolence by placing the discussion in the scope of eternal demons and hell, thus raising the stakes of everyday goodness. The man, now under God's protection, did not perform any of those great acts that it was encouraged to fantasize, but just try to embody a kind of common kindness, praying for your daily bread, and by the force to remain good for the next few hours. He became a fantastic mix of normality and sanctity. Before, he was a reflection of all these little cruelties that we find in everyday life, is now a representation of ordinary kindness. Is the person who gives you your used subway ticket, or the strange that to ask if you are right on the street. Just as the way to hell is a series of little sins, the way to heaven is painted as a collection of virtues. I think this is an immensely encouraging note for light to end, being the perfect counterpoint to the previous discussion about the impact of evil. Ordinary. We cannot deny that God plays a very important role in the explanation of light about everyday kindness. This leads us to ask, what is needed to, thanks to the call of darkness, to stand firm in the face of forced situations? Who translated us into the miraculous? The answer lies in personal responsibility. This brings us the uncomfortable truth that light emphasizes. We all carry within us the seeds, both good and evil. We are living contradictions, capable of acts and depths of cruelty. The choice between these two extremes, it's not something that happens once. It's a constant struggle, a daily battle. Light calls us to recognize this duality within ourselves, to understand that the potential for evil, it's not just in some distant land or some monster, but within each of us. Understand this duality. Accept that we have the capacity both for good, how much for evil, makes us, in Carl Jung's words, more able to direct our actions and make decisions that are aligned with our true nature. This awareness not only makes us better people, but also more aware, ready to act with intent, instead of being away by situational forces. It is crucial to understand that the line between good and evil, it's not just a philosophical concept. It is a practical and everyday reality. But here is the detail. Know and understand this means you have a power that many don't. You're not just another one face in the crowd, following order blindly, or succumbing to environmental pressures. You are aware of the factors that can lead you along a dark path, and with that awareness comes responsibility. Be aware of these. Strength gives you the tools to move forward, because in the end, it's not just about avoiding evil, but actively choosing the good. But we must understand that the choice between good and evil is not a great singular event. It's a series of little everyday decisions. Every time you stand up for what is right, every time he resists the pressure of the crowd and chooses to see humanity in others, you are resisting the forces that seek to transform you into something you are not. It's not easy, not always, of course, but it is necessary. The author clearly does not want this to be easy. Throughout the letters, there are examples of people who are wrong, thinking they are being loving, when in fact, all they want is possession, or the elevation of your own pride. For light, develop a genuine and constant concern for others is a long and arduous task, but one worth. If you are religious, This could be for the rewards in a future life. But if you are not, it may simply be to encourage kindness, the calm and serenity in this world. In conclusion, See with Lewis alerts us to the fragility of human morality and the ease with which we deviate from the path of goodness through small, almost imperceptible, everyday cruelties. He reminds us that the real danger is in our illusions and the way we use the fantasy to convince ourselves that we are better than, that our actions show. The line between good and evil is not a distant vibration. It is present in the decisions and attitudes we make daily, shaping who we are. Lewis challenges us to face this inner duality and to commit ourselves continuously with the good, not through great gestures or unreachable virtues, but through small acts of genuine kindness that, added, has the power to transform ourselves so much, how much the world around us.